All right, so this is Ben Deangelis. I think he was graduate of the year 2014. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that when you graduated?
It's
actually mine. Ben didn't graduate. Yeah, so also known as Follygon Online. He has an online school.
Yes, it's called the Appeal Academy. Boom, the Appeal Academy. It's a personal mentorship program, as well as a guided course going through creating stylized characters. Essentially, the idea is learning how to create feeling shapes and thus learning how to create feeling characters. It's a bit more of an advanced thing, so I would recommend that if you were interested in taking it, you would at least have a very firm grasp on the fundamentals of the software of Zbrush. I also have a YouTube channel where I upload a ton of free content called Follygon. Just search Google Follygon and you'll find everything right there. Where I essentially show off my entire process going through from beginning to end, showing how I create characters. And I thought it would be cool if we did a little bit of a general overview of that today, as well as just look at a bunch of character results that I've created in the past. You can see a few of those, and we'll look at a few of those here in just a moment. When I do these kinds of things, I like it to be very open. So if you guys have any questions while I go, feel free to shout it out. I like to make these things pretty interactive. Let's see. I'm gonna take just a moment and find out whether I can throw a couple of these files. So give me just a moment here. I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to
Talk about.
Yeah, sure.
Mostly just the weather. It's pretty nice outside.
Yeah, it is. How's everybody doing?
Yeah, hopefully.
How you guys liking Zbrush? It's okay. You've been using it for like a few weeks now, I think, right?
So far, they haven't smashed the Cintiq, so that's a pretty good sign.
That's good.
Yeah. I personally have noticed some huge user interface advances from the first, well, I actually started in ZBrush way back in the day, in ZBrush 1.8 or something along those lines, 1.4.
Wow, you're old.
I am old. Thank you. For reminding me. But that program, well, that was before YouTube and all that stuff existed, so there wasn't really any tutorials. And you kind of just wanted to put your fist through the screen half the time, and the other time you just thought it was magic. You thought you were the coolest sculptor in the world. But yeah, that was, I kind of lost time, I guess, to work in that because I started working professionally, and it was all Maya, so for Maya and graphic design. But then came back and started working in 4R7, and then that was a huge jump ahead.
Yeah.
Huge jump ahead.
Yeah, I started in 4R5, which was like 2013, I think.
Mm.
And I'm sorry, I'm just setting up a couple custom. So this is the standard ZBrush user interface, which if you've used before is a little frustrating. So I customized it to make it quite a bit easier to use for myself, which I will grab here in just a moment.
This is one of the things we talked about in class. The difference between projects, one of the differences between projects and tools with the custom user interfaces and saving your brushes and all that jazz.
Yeah.
Probably be a good thing to teach at some point is how to save the custom for create custom user interfaces. It's a nice color.
Thank you. It's easy on the eyes.
Yeah, yeah.
I will delete all of this when I leave, don't worry.
Well, then do your thing. I just open stuff up and switch to other
Yeah, this little,
user interfaces.
there we go. Use the full screen right there. And then that little white box thumbnail, go away.
all the things they added in 2020 and 2021. Just toss to the side.
Okay, I should be good. I just need to restart Zbrush real fast. We can say some words.
I would say I do like that little navigator face in the right-hand corner, which you don't have it there anymore, but.
Yeah, a little thing to help you
Yeah, there he
keep
is.
track.
Yeah, that guy is so nice, especially when you're starting off, or if you're just, for me, just trying to click through, you don't feel like holding shift.
Okay, we're good. Let me just, you know what, we'll keep those on screen for a second. All right. So sorry about the delay there, guys. Let me just open up a couple of files. Actually, have you talked at all about the difference between tools and project files?
Yes.
So I brought a bunch of finished models here. This is the most recent one that I created, and I believe that the materials will be a little messed up, so it might look a little goofy at first. Just give me 1 moment. I'll fix that. Z plugin, a cool little thing in here. If you guys ever want to do something real fun, Subtool Master. Actually, I have this in mind. I'll have to reload my hotkeys. So Z plugin, Subtool Master, and we want fill. Click on material, whatever your chosen material is, it'll go through and assign that material to every single object. So I have a bunch of subtools in this file. I have 39 individual subtools. Is that appearing? Okay. So this is the most recent character that I worked on, and I was going to essentially just kind of run you through a little bit of a mile-wide perspective on how I go through and create a character. A little bit more about me. Like Nick said, I graduated in 2013 with a media informatics degree. I'm sorry, 2014. I don't even know what year I graduated. And then from there, I graduated with mostly a specialization in web development, front-end web dev. That was more of my spies at the time. But around my junior year of college is when I got into Zbrush. I did a study abroad program in Japan, and I was using Mudbox at the time. I don't know if you guys have heard of Autodesk Mudbox, but Mudbox requires a graphics card to run. And when I went off to Japan, I had a laptop without a graphics card in it. So I was forced, essentially, to use Zbrush, and I'm really glad that I was forced to do that, because I ended up loving the software way more than Autodesk's Mudbox. And by now, Zbrush is leaps and bounds ahead of where Mudbox was back then, and it's much nicer. Fix that little quick save option. If you guys aren't familiar with quick save while you're working, this little button up here, just give that a quick click and it'll save your file for you. It goes up here in the Lightbox quick save folder. Very nice, very handy. I'm just toggling it off completely for our session today because I'm going to be loading in like at least 10 to 20 gigabytes of characters. So, like I said, from there, I started off with web development, was kind of doing Zbrush on the side. Just kind of freelancing whatever I could get at the time until eventually I got a job up in Kenwood, Ohio at a little place called Life Formations. It was called the LF Creative Group at the time. It's called Life Formations now. I worked there as a digital sculptor, working on toys, amusement park figures, and museum figures. So I did a ton of different stuff for parks in Dubai. I did some stuff for local stuff in the US, some different museums. Like the Museum of Flight in Seattle, Washington, did some pilots for them. I've worked on a number of different intellectual properties, including Barbie, Pokemon, Shrek, Hotel Transylvania, Fighter with a Chance of Meatballs, the Looney Tunes, the Flintstones, the Iron Man. I mean, just like a ton of different stuff. And I've had a ton of fun, you know, working as a, oh, we got to turn that off. That thing's annoying. I don't even know where that is. But yeah, I've worked on a ton of different IP. Most recently, I've done some stuff for Supercell, the creators of Clash of Clans. So currently, I freelance full-time, but I also am a content creator online, which I briefly showed you my YouTube channel there. as well as an online educator. Screensaver, go away. Awesome. So that's a little bit about my background, but we're going to take this time to take a look at some different characters, and I'm going to show you, like I said earlier, a little bit of a mile-wide perspective on how I go about going from a sphere to that. And like I said, any questions or comments, anything along the way, feel free to shout it out. No need to like raise your hand or anything. I like to keep these things pretty open. Any questions though before we jump in?
How do you get that screensaver to go away?
That is an amazing question. It's in the preferences under screensaver. You just toggle that off. So that screensaver on-off button. What's so funny is that originally that on-off button didn't exist when they put this in Zbrush last year. So you just had a screensaver's timer, and you just cranked it up to like 1 million seconds or minutes or whatever that is. So yes, you can just toggle it off now complete. You can also toggle these off. I typically keep those off because they're kind of a little frustrating for me. In the versions of Zbrush that I started off on, those never existed. So I always like to keep it the way, you know, I like to be stuck in my ways. I'm noticing that some of my stuff isn't loading on the screen properly. I don't know if you guys can see how some of it's running off the sides. And that's because I have a 24-inch Cintiq back at my office. So actually, I think if you hold the control key, if you have a custom UI or if your UI is not all the way on screen, just to let you guys know, you can slide this. You can actually slide any of these little menus. This one's a little bit harder to get with all this stuff on it, but we'll go ahead and start here. Any other questions? Awesome. So like I said, character most recent, fun little character that I worked on with an artist by the name of Chelsea Gracie. She created the 2D concept art for the character that I worked from myself. She is a thief-like character from a world similar to Mistborn, if you guys are familiar with that universe. It's essentially a world covered in perpetual fog, and she is a Robin Hood-esque character that goes around stealing light sources from the rich and giving them to the poor. But obviously, you know, all the characters that I work on do not start off looking so finished and polished. They start off a lot closer to this. So this little goofy thing here is called a blockout. Essentially a character blockout, or a blockout for anything sculptural or 3D modeling related. The idea is to focus on large forms or silhouette. So with this idea, I am looking at my reference and trying to find the large forms that affect the silhouette in the most basic way, and trying to represent those here during the early stages. I also like to put in little placeholders. As you can see, I have some little eyes up here. Uh-oh, what's going on? There we go. Some little eyes, some ears, but obviously we're pretty far off from there to there. So a lot of stuff happens in between. And actually, things don't start off like this. They actually start off more like this. So I start working pretty much everything that I sculpt from a sphere. And I'll take that sphere and begin manipulating it very quickly into the basic shape of, you know, a head, and then start creating a torso. The objective, though, during these early stages, and I think Nick said that you guys are familiar with masking and the move brush, so that's literally all I've used there. I'll grab a different mask brush. Looks like my hotkeys did not load in properly. Let's see.
Really messes with the workflow, doesn't it?
Well, when I have so much muscle memory around it that
Right, that's what I'm saying.
For me, it's like the standard ZBrush user interface. I know how to use it. I just can't.
Right. What hotkey were you using to switch between fully black material? Yeah.
Yeah, so that is the V key on the keyboard. It actually, in Photoshop, if you press the X key, it'll swap your colors. In ZBrush, if you press V, it'll switch colors for you real quick. So that's just like a quick little, if you have the, you know, if you use the new version of ZBrush, it'll show the silhouette up there for you, but if you want, you can have a little more screen real estate and kind of go from there. But yeah, like I said, I'll just, very quickly here in the early stages, start working on creating multiple pieces of geometry. There's a lot of really different cool, quick shortcuts that you can kind of take to start blocking things out pretty quickly. There we go. So during this stage, I'm not focused on any specifics or anything like that, but more so just kind of getting something on the canvas as quick as possible. The basic idea is that you just want to get something there as quick as you can so that you can compare and start working on proportions, because you obviously can't start working on something like proportions if you don't have anything to compare against. Pretty straightforward stuff, and you can start to see that taking shape from maybe a quick little head, neck, and torso, and then we would continue to go from there until eventually we get to something like this. Cool. Then from there, we'll go ahead and take a look at that next step, which is a little bit more refined. But obviously, you know what, I'll have to fix the materials here as well. Not sure why my menu is not popping up. So anytime you get a new version of Zbrush, for some reason, all the materials when you load it into a new version like to break. It's a ton of fun for me. There we go. So as you can see, from here to here, we still have a huge, long way to go. But from this point to this point, we've started to evolve quite a bit. So a lot of refinement going on. I've quickly added in color, which is essentially called here in Zbrush polypaint. You can do this with any brush that you have selected. So here's a nice little awkward shape for her hair beginning to get formed, beginning to block out. Any brush that you have selected, you have these little toggles at the top of your screen. And these three specifically are material, RGB, which is color, and mRGB, which is both. So if you select a material, so for instance, the basic material, grab yourself a color, and you click on fill object, it'll fill that in. And then of course, because you have that brush selected as well, you can also paint directly on that geometry. But as you can see, as I'm painting, it's also adding to the geometry. So if you just toggle off Z add or Z sub, whatever you have there, then it's just a normal paintbrush. Use that however you want. The Rgb intensity, you can think of like a percentage slider. So if you put this on 50 and click on fill object, it'll fill in 50% of that green. You can see that you get something nice in between, nice puke color. So that's looking real nice. I think we'll probably keep that there. But yeah, so during this stage, I am focusing on refining the things that I already have. So the initial stage is get all the pieces blocked in, get everything kind of where it's supposed to go. And then in this stage, it's more of focusing on those proportions, refining the little things, starting to get ready to get to a place where you can really start polishing the final details. Between this point and the next stage, I will briefly take a quick look at the face, because I think between this stage and the last one, and that's a little unfortunate that we're going to have to do that every single time. Okay. So between that last stage and this one, there's a lot of stuff that happens. But if you take a look at the actual character's body, you can see that there's even some floating awkward stuff going on there. It doesn't look like too much has changed. Maybe from a distance, you can see a couple things, but I'd like to just kind of zoom in here on the face a little bit more. So with this face and everything here that I'm showing you was sculpted or 3D modeled up from a primitive piece of geometry. The head was created from a sphere. So between these steps, between refinement, so blockout, refinement, and polish, really not too much changes. It's very, very small tweaks. You can kind of see the very slight differences happening there. So a lot of these are focusing on making the character more appealing visually. A lot of these things are very subtle fundamentals that you would learn about in my course. But we don't really have enough time here to get into all the specifics. But essentially, during the stage, I make the face look nice, as well as all the other parts. So that is kind of the basic step of everything that I create: blockout, refine, and polish. And that actually holds true into everything after that as well. So for these characters, I typically, so my background is in working in the toy industry. And with that, I have worked on games in the past, but for the most part, a lot of what I work on is creating a character in 3D that's going to be in a specific pose, and it's never going to be any different. But obviously, if you're creating something for, let's say, a film or a game or any kind of real-time experience or anything that you would animate, you would need that character to stay more in that neutral T or A pose so that you could later retopologize, rig, and animate that character. So something like this, I start posing it here in Zbrush manually using masks, which is something that you guys are already familiar with. So I start moving all the parts and pieces, starting to head closer in that direction. And like I said, with everything here, I treat it very similarly, where if I'm posing a character, I start by blocking out that pose, which just kind of means getting the rough pose. And then from there, I refine and polish. So this is the final character here. As you can see, just between those last two steps, that pose is becoming a lot more dynamic, and there's a lot more just tiny little details happening on screen there between those two. That's kind of a quick mile high perspective on my basic workflow, but I would love to hone in on any specifics if you guys have any questions, or I can keep talking if not.
How long does it take you to get from Blockout to maybe not the final pose, but maybe pre-final pose?
So this character, for instance, that we're looking at, took maybe somewhere between, I would say maybe about 50 hours for from absolute, nothing, starting with just a sphere on screen to the eventual final render. But to get to about that stage, I would say maybe 30 to 40 hours. The final stages of polish are actually something that take up quite a bit of time. And it's actually a part of the process where you have to walk away the most, because what happens is you get to a point where you're looking at your work for so long, you're so familiar with it, that eventually you can't see your mistakes. You can't see what's going wrong with it. So I think you guys are working on like a shield right now. And if you're trying to you're like, it's good enough or whatever, you could maybe just take a break, take a step away, go eat some lunch, come back and, try to pick up on some new mistakes and push that even further. So that last little bit is actually something that takes quite a bit of time.
How much time do you spend looking at reference and so forth for your work?
A lot of time. I actually, I don't have like an image I can load in here. But normally I'll load in the image directly into Zbrush and kind of keep it on screen. And it's kind of best to, in my opinion, go a little bit slow. I think you probably all have heard like, what is it, measure twice, cut once. It's kind of the same idea where you want to be looking at that reference as often as possible if you're trying to reference something. But obviously if you're not, sky's the limit, go crazy. But even if I'm not, referencing a specific piece like I was with that last character, where I'm trying to work from a 2D concept, or any of my client work where I'm working from a 2D concept, which is even more tedious and slow because they're very much a stickler for the specifics of just the tiniest things that you wouldn't imagine. Like for instance, like looking at her elbow, that shape and silhouette, if we were to larger and maybe get rid of the nasty green. So for instance, that little, what's called a hit or a break in the surface, this is essentially the apex of a curve or the point at which a surface changes direction. This would be, heavily looked at by any client, kind of get that hyper-specific shape for every little thing. And that is true for, just everything. So very much sticklers for it. So lots of looking at reference, trying to get everything exactly the same. This is Android 18 from Dragon Ball Z, which I'm sure you are, or many of you are familiar with. This is actually the character that I create during my course, the Appeal Academy, but I'm always working on new work, whether it be client or personal. So I'm typically during the class showing off, whatever I'm working on as well. Yeah, we got just like a bunch of fun little characters here that we can kind of take a quick peek at. If anything sparks any questions or interest, then stop and take a closer look.
About the reference image. Sorry, I was trying to find a spot to put in.
No, you're fine. Go right ahead.
Do you drop it in sort of as like an image plane like you would in Maya, or is there a way to drop it in sort of like that silhouette window that pops on top left?
There's a much better way, actually. And I will show you here in just a moment. Some of these do have texture maps on them, and they're loading a bit up.
Thanks.
Here we go. So weird. Some of my UI stuff has loaded in, but a lot of it has not. I'm not sure why. That's no big deal. We'll function. All right. So the thing that I use is what's called the Spotlight tool in Zbrush. Let's see. Where is the Google? All right. So here we'll download this into here. And essentially what you do is you go to the texture menu, you click on import, find your image, click on open, and then you can do this up in the texture menu if you want. There's a couple different ways to do it. You just click up here, select your image, and then click on this button that says add to Spotlight. So that'll add it to Spotlight. ZBrush looks at the color of pure black in ZBrush as transparent, which is why you can see through some of these pixels. And then there is this little wheel here. This wheel has a lot of stuff on it, and it's maybe a little bit intimidating to look at, but there's like 2 things, maybe 3, that you have to worry about on here. The first one is opacity, right here. Just click, drag, turn that opacity up. And then the second one is scale, and it'll scale from wherever you have this little ring. You can just scale your image down, click, and move it around. Maybe you want to put your reference image over here, and you just have that on screen. And like I said, if you have a character or a shield or whatever object you're working on, you can simply import it through here. You can hide that little spotlight wheel by hitting the Z key on your keyboard, and Shift Z on your keyboard will hide your reference image. So it's very handy for just having. You can move around. Let's say this was an image of this character that I was using, or maybe I had some hands or something that I was referencing. I could grab the hand, I could move the image of the hand over, and I could turn down the opacity and kind of overlay it. So it's very handy. I did not mean to do that.
Oh, this guy.
So I'll just, you know what? It's been nice. It's been fun, guys.
We call campus police.
So yeah, that's the basic process. Spotlight tool, very nice here inside ZBrush. But there's also tools like PureRef, which is like a standalone image viewing software. It's called PureRef because it's mostly used for referencing images and such. So that's also very popular.
That one's free too, isn't it?
It is free, yeah.
Yeah.
Unlike ZBrush. So.
Watch that.
Yeah, so that's the basic process that I use there.
Nice.
Texture, add to Spotlight. Z and Shift Z are the 2 hotkeys. All right, cool. Well, we'll take a look at a few more characters here. I am also happy to look at anything that you guys are working on as well. If you guys have any specific questions about what you have, I would be happy to do that as well. Let's see. So a lot of what I do is kind of these stylized characters. It's kind of what I've just focused on and kind of pushed into. But I also work on a lot of other fun things here. Let's see, where's my material? So this was a quick little creature sculpt that I did that I turned into a bust, hence the kind of stand there that I blended the creature into. And yeah, I 3D printed this a couple of times. I have a resin 3D printer back at my office, and yeah, it's fun to play with every now and again. I enjoy getting to print anymore. When I was working on toys, I 3D printed like maybe 5 to 10 things a day. It was insane. We had We had 4 smaller FDM machines, which, if you're not familiar with, is a printer that has a resin, or not, I'm sorry, a plastic spool of what looks like kind of like weed whacker, a spool of weed whacker material. And it just feeds in and melts the plastic and does it layer by layer. And then we have a couple of resin printers. That's what I have. It's essentially a vat of resin. A plate goes down. Here's one layer, and very slowly starts to, it looks like it's pulling it out of the deep. It's pretty cool. And then we also have a 1 meter cubed 3D printer, which was an absolute bitch to work with. So that was fun, but it was a pain in the butt. But yeah, you get to work on tons of fun stuff. Sculpting here in Zbrush is a lot of fun, but I think the real challenge with Zbrush, as you guys are right now, you guys are kind of still learning the UI and the tool set, and that's kind of the first major hurdle. But after that, then you have to, really start to learn and improve in 3D modeling and your sculpting abilities and just understanding of form in general. Is anybody here interested in pursuing, any kind of game, film, anything in that industry at all? Are you guys more checking off a box on the school list, or what's?
I'm kind of in the interest of video game stuff, but I'm not actually sure what facet of it yet.
Cool. Are you interested in animation at all? Have you played around? I think you guys have had an animation class, is that right? Or
I took animation what feels like forever ago.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it, but I think I enjoyed just the straight picking up models a little bit more than animation.
Yeah, I think you guys' class, or your group, you guys came in after the intro to animation class was already formed. So, or you guys came in before that, but I mean, it originated after you guys already passed that milestone. Yeah. So you guys had, what was it? The intermediate modeling, rigging, and animation class. Is that the one you guys?
No, that was after. Whenever I first took it, it was just the modeling and then the separate animation class. I think it was just after they had started to separate the stuff.
Okay, so you did have 244.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's still kind of a mixture of some of you guys. This is a good one.
So this is.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
What does that? Oh wait, well, it's too late. I was wondering what the sculpture looked like before the textures were put on, because it has a almost like a mindless drawing look, and I was just curious what it looked like if you spun it around.
Yeah, I'll do it here at the bottom since the top is kind of messed up. So the material that it's importing here with, I believe, is just the flat material, which you can find over here, flat color. I believe that's what it's displaying it in currently. The reason it's doing that is because the material gets disassociated with the subtool from Zbrush 20. I made these in Zbrush 2020. It's been updated to Zbrush 2021. And even the newer character that I have here, that I was showing off previously, this was actually made in Zbrush 2021.1, I think, is what they're on right now. I'm on the most updated version, so when importing that, it's still, I don't have anything from exactly 2021, so it's all disassociating the material.
That's pretty frustrating. It's a shame they don't fix that more like Maya, where it's cross-platform, independent of updates.
Right.
Unless you're doing Arnold stuff, obviously.
Well, the main problem is that I am using a custom material right now to display in. It's a free material that you can get online called Zbrush Paint. Zbrush has, you can't see it's just the letter Z and bro, Zbrush. He has a number of free materials online. His paint material is very nice for just working as a base white color. If you guys are wanting to just use something very simple in here by default, the skin shade 4 material is also very nice. And I'll just fill that in on this character so you can see it's updating right now, but it's a very slight difference. Maybe you guys can see the slight differences as it updates, but very minor. It's just kind of a preference that I use that material. So this character is Enchantress from Dota 2. I was working on this character as they were about to announce, I think it's I don't know, maybe somebody hearing this better than I, Lilia or Ilia, I don't know, they released some new character that was a servitor, half person, half deer, and everybody now mentions on the video that, oh, you made this character. I'm like, well, actually I made that before that one. But fun little character sculpt. I love working on not just human characters, but animals. Sculpting animals is really great practice. If you're looking for assignments, sculpting some animal heads, I think is always really great practice. Sculpting humans, sculpting people in general, is incredibly, incredibly difficult because we look at people all day. And it's very easy to notice when even the slightest thing could be off, whether it's, in a cartoony style or not. Just having the proportions of the eyes off even slightly too high or too low, too far apart. It's like the tiniest thing makes your character really tilt into this awkward, creepy, and or uncanny valley area. So if you're wanting to start working on a human character at some point, I recommend starting off with some animals first to just kind of get some good practice without getting super, super frustrated and wanting to punch your Cintiq, as Nick mentioned earlier.
You don't want to go through too many Cintiqs, they get expensive.
Take it like that, I'm a college kid already, man.
Yeah, what's a little more, right?
Yeah, just throw it on the old home.
So I wanted to show a little bit of a quick demo on a little bit of a workflow for how I create what I call hyper clean shapes in Zbrush. And it's going to introduce some new tools here that you guys have not played with yet, called Dynamesh and Sirimesher. And I'm just going to show a very kind of quick rundown on this. And we'll probably do it on just starting off with a quick little sphere. And we'll start again. I think I had like a little, yeah, we'll start here. Grab this guy. Let's see. Normally I have a custom menu that loads here with me, but it's not working for some reason. All right. So we're just going to take this sphere that I quickly turned into the, starting to turn into the basic shapes of a head. If you missed that or blinked, essentially I just create the mask on the side of the object in a essentially 1/4 mask of the shape, kind of like a slice of pie, and just use the move brush, which you guys are familiar with, to start pulling down on that frontal shape. So the idea there is that a basic human head kind of follows two basic shapes, the sphere of the back of the skull, and then a little bit of a boxy kind of shelf for the front plane of the face, which we could start working on a little bit more and playing with. But instead of doing that, I would just like to show you guys a very quick demo of me creating a couple quick shapes here, and then I'll show you guys how I kind of work with my geometry in general, because I think it's very helpful, and it's a lot of stuff that I wish I knew when I started using this software, which is a lot of what I try to teach in general. So in Zbrush, there are two main, there's actually three, but the two that we're going to be looking at are called Dynamesh and Sirimesher. And these are the two main ways to kind of manipulate and work with geometry here in Zbrush. The first one, Dynamesh, is down here in the tool menu. If you scroll on down to Tool, Geometry, Dynamesh. Have you covered the Dynamesh before at all?
Yeah, we've used it just a little bit.
Cool. So Dynamesh, the main thing that you want to worry about here is the resolution. And you also want to make sure that this little toggle here that says project, it is project though. You want to make sure that is toggled on. In a lot of versions of Zbrush, that is on by default. I'm not sure if it's because I loaded in my preferences. It might be on by default in yours. Toggle that off. It's very bad, and it makes your Dynameshes look horrible. So if you just click on Dynamesh, it'll Dynamesh your geometry. Mine will look exactly the same, but if we just Control-Z back and forth between those two, you can see how the geometry has updated there. So Dynamesh, it dynamically updates your geometry, as the name implies, dynamic mesh. the resolution slider affects that appropriately. I have that down here at the bottom of my screen on my custom UI, so I won't be messing with that too much here. I'll put it on the sidebar. To get Dynamesh to update again, you can just control click and drag on your canvas with your mask, and that will re-Dynamesh. But to get it to work, you have to adjust your geometry, even just the slightest bit here. So I'll just use my smooth brush, smooth it out a little bit with the shift key, Dynamesh again, and there you can see it updated that time. And then essentially I just lowered the resolution. So during this initial stage of what I call blockout, or your primary forms, the basic idea here is to just start, working quick, working fast, and start slowly building up, the shapes that you need. Very quickly, you could start blocking in different shapes like a nose, throw in some quick, let's see, I like to just throw in a quick little box or sphere that I'll squash very quickly over here. That perspective slider is really messing with the transpose line. This tool here, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, it's called the transpose line. It's a bit of a holdover from some older versions of ZBrush. You guys are probably more familiar with this, which is called the 3D Gizmo here in ZBrush. The transpose line is kind of the same thing, but it also has a bunch of cool, kind of little hidden features that you'd probably only know about if you sat and played with the software for a long time or actually read the documentation. Which, who's going to do that? Who has time for that? I apparently have time for that. So there's some really cool stuff in there that you can do. For instance, with this head, you pull out your transpose line and you have move selected and you right click in this end circle, you can inflate or deflate your geometry or some fun little effects. So that is a scale on the normal, which is called an inflate, and you can find that also down under deformation. And then there's a little slider here that says inflate that you can play with. That's a little bit of a quick way to get to it. There's all sorts of other stuff that you can do, like you can clip geometry very quickly with the transpose line. The way I did that was with move selected, all you do is click in that first little line when you draw this out, or first little circle. If you pull this out and hold the shift key, it will also snap to, I think, maybe every, this is snapping a lot less than mine, but that looks like maybe every 10 degrees or so. But yeah, very handy tool in general. But to continue on with the basics of what I was mentioning, continuing on here with Dynamesh, I will very quickly merge in just a moment some ears into our basic head. I'm trying to mainly just use, I shouldn't say trying, I am mainly just using the move brush for most of this process because that is, in all honesty, 90% of what I use while I am sculpting. I will use all of these brushes that I have, down here at the bottom. Try to get them all on the screen for you. Struggling, doesn't want me to. There we go. So I use the standard brush. These are all variations on these brushes. These are custom brushes that I have. A clay brush, a trim brush, which I think you've looked at a lot of these. I'm not sure if you guys have looked at trim brushes. They're essentially variations of planar brushes in ZBrush. You click the B key, billion brushes. That's too many brushes, right? You really only need like 5 of them. The one that I recommend for trim is called Trim Dynamic, which you can find right down here after you click the T key while opening up the brush menu. So trimming off or planing geometry, and then pinch brushes are also really great for planing off and starting to work on those large kind of plane change shapes. We'll just kind of do that a little bit more here for just a second longer. And then we'll grab these ears, slide them in, and merge them together with Dynamesh. So if you guys have used Dynamesh for a little bit, you probably are familiar that you can use Dynamesh for Boolean operations. So by re-Dynameshing with 2 pieces of geometry touching, they do have to be in the same subtool here. So this body down here that I've created is a separate subtool, and then the head here with the ear is another one. So because those are in the same subtool, when I Dynamesh, it went ahead and combined those pieces of geometry.
How do you combine those 2 subtools to make sure that they're together?
Yeah,
Initially, when you create one, they're usually your primitives are different subtools, correct?
yeah, so it kind of depends on how you go about it, but for this process, I actually initially split this off. It's actually pretty fun here for Goofy. But the essential workflow that I like to do, I like to keep things split off into separate objects just so I can control them a little bit better. But for instance, to answer the inverse of what you asked, because that's what I'm going to do first here, is that you can hold Control and Shift to select different poly groups, which are, if you hit Shift F or click on polyframe there, you can see all the colors. Those are different poly groups. So Control Shift click, and then click on Split, Split Hidden. So this is the tool menu under Geometry, or I'm sorry, under Subtool, Split, Split Hidden. So that's created two separate subtools now of those objects. But if you wanted to merge them together, instead of clicking on Split, you click on Merge and any of these. I prefer just using the Merge Down function and slowly starting to merge and combine all of these together. So merge the head down into the neck and body, and then we could, Dynamesh and continue to start sculpting and blending between these two areas and play with that even more. So Dynamesh is really great in these early stages for just blocking things out, but as you can see, it's pretty messy. Eventually, you're going to want something a little bit more clean and easy to work with, and that is when a little tool called Sirimesher comes into play. So Sirimesher is an automatic retopology tool in Zbrush. So you can find that under Geometry, right under Dynamesh, just two under Dynamesh here, Sirimesher. So Sirimesher is a little complicated because I think people use it incorrectly a lot of the time. So to be a little bit more careful with it, my recommendation is to use Sirimesher at the lowest possible setting that you can. And the idea here is, and I'll just go ahead and click this at 0.1, which is as low as it'll go. 0.1 will try to remesh this at about 100 polygons or so, but it actually does 100 on the positive axis and then mirrors it over, so it'll be closer to 200, but because it's not perfect, it'll probably be closer to like 3 or 4. And because we already have like 100,000 polys there, it might take a minute. I also have a bunch of files loaded in. So the main purpose of Sirimesher is to give yourself something that's easier to work with. And we're getting something. There we go. All right. So that might be a little too low poly. And like I said, not quite 100, a little bit higher, closer to 3. My rule of thumb with Sirimesher is the same rule of thumb that I use when I'm blocking out my characters, which is if I'm going from something like this to that really low poly version that I just Sirimeshed to, as long as it's maintaining the same silhouette, then I am happy with that resolution. So this is a little bit too low, so I would want to actually increase that a little bit more. So we were just at 100, so maybe we could try 1,000 here. See what we can get. So Sirimesher is something where you don't want to be using it to remesh your geometry to something like 50 or 100,000 polys. Always turn the adapt on. That'll make it a bit more accurate in terms of retaining your form. And there we go. So that's quite a bit more clean for our geometry. Obviously, it's not a perfect tool. It's not going to give you this perfect flow of geometry that's animation ready. Although there are some tricks that you can do to force it to give you something a lot closer to that, which is actually what I use a lot of the time. And I'll show you that right now. So the other way that I use this tool is with this little toggle right here that says Keep Groups. Keep Groups will look at your polygroup information, which if you're not familiar with polygroups, they're really cool and really easy to use. If you hit Shift F on your keyboard, there you can see that everything is one solid polygroup, that red color. I'll even turn off the line so you can see a little bit better. If you hold the Control key and use any kind of mask, I am specifically using the mask lasso, which you can hold the Control key, click up here and grab a mask lasso. Very handy tool. You can draw out a quick mask and press Control W. Control W will create a polygroup from whatever you have masked, which is very handy for a number of reasons because you can Control Shift click to make different selections and all sorts of other fun stuff. But the main purpose that we are going to be using it for here is with this little toggle on Sirimesher that says Cube Groups. So the little toggle there will essentially look at this separation of poly groups, and it will do its very best to give you what's called an edge loop or poly loop in that area, which if you guys have ever poly modeled anything or box modeled anything, you're probably somewhat familiar with. But it'll do its very best to try to give us something a bit more clean there. I'll make, maybe a couple more of these, maybe, one around the eyes of this character or something very quick and simple, just so we can kind of see a couple more examples. So when you draw that mask, Control W is the hotkey to polygroup it, like I said. But if you don't have any mask on screen, the Control W hotkey will actually just polygroup everything as one polygroup. So if you want to just erase everything, Control W is the way to go. There you go. As you can see, it's given us a nice clean edge loop around the neck, around here. This is not normally where I would put one, but I was just using it as an example. If you're trying to create some topology around your character's eyes, I could have probably put one around the ears to get a little bit of a better result, but that is how I would go about that process. So now I have something low poly that's easier to just manipulate here with a move brush to work on. To step back a little bit, the reason why it's so nice to have that low poly geometry is because if I wanted to make a large move on something like this and adjust it with the move brush, but I have 500,000 or 2 million or 8 million polygons, and I grab the move brush and start adjusting that, well, you start to get these little artifacts of the fall off of your brush. So the geometry, you're essentially trying to make a move that is just it just has too much polygons. It's too dense for the geometry that you're trying to make that move on. So instead, you would want to use that lower subdivision level or lower geometry to instead, use a move brush. And as you can see, we're not getting that kind of weird fall off that we were having before. That's kind of my basic workflow for how I begin creating hyper-clean shapes. From there, you can Control D or subdivide your geometry more and more as you sculpt it up and work on it. But I'm not sure how much you've talked about subdivision levels or anything like that. But,
A little bit.
Yeah, so that would be kind of the next stage of the process, but that's kind of how I get started here, blocking out my characters. And you can kind of see how we have like a basic, maybe skull-like shape here, working on the planes of the head. I would continue to shape this up for a while until I started working on it a bit more. So yeah, that's basically it. Any questions so far? You say so far, but we're almost done here. And then time. Cool. So I think we have a couple more quick little models that we could maybe load in and just take a quick look at. Already looked at quite a few. Let's see. So as an example of just how quickly you can go about doing this kind of stuff, this is a quick from material, of course. Try that one more time. So this is a quick little head that I did of Hercules, Disney Hercules, right? And this took, I think, a little less than 2 hours. I did it during a quick live stream the other day. And I'll be doing another one of these, not this exact one, but something similar tonight. I stream on the official Pixelogic Zbrush live channel. And I have a stream scheduled for tonight for them. They pester me to do it, although I don't do it too much anymore. So it'll be fun. We'll do something like this, or maybe like a little dog or something. I'm not quite sure yet. Yeah, very cool. So that's what you can do in maybe just a couple quick hours in the future.
With practice.
With lots of practice, yeah. But yeah.
So when I make an assignment, I tell you guys, you need to make this head in 3 hours. It can be done.
It can be done.
It can be done.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work. It's like anything else, though, right? It's a little practice and you get there eventually.
Kind of picking a path really is, I think, the key to mastery, in anything.
Yeah,
Trying
so
to master everything at once. Like, you end up kind of where I'm at, as a teacher here. I have to master absolutely everything all at the same time, which, surprisingly, I still have hair left, but a lot of it's getting gray. But if you're able to pick a path, like Ben has, it's a whole lot easier to truly master a skill, not just get kind of good at a skill.
Yeah, I am very much of the mindset that people should go into specialization. The only reason I think that you should ever generalize yourself is if you are going to attempt to work at an indie studio or something very small where you're going to wear many hats. Other than that, specialize as much as you can. The more you specialize, the more valuable you are, and the more you can market yourself for that very specific thing. And the easier it will be, I say easier, but the more work you can put into that one thing to kind of set yourself apart from everybody else. So if you want to be, a 2D artist, don't just be a 2D artist, be, a concept artist, or maybe don't even be just a concept artist. Be a concept artist that creates, hyper-realistic characters, and you can knock them out, one after another in just like an hour or two, all day long. So the more you can specialize, I think the better. But that's very dependent on what you want to do. Yeah, so that's it. That's the whole thing. That's the whole shebang. Any other questions or anything? I'm if you guys want me to look at any of your projects or anything that you guys are working on, I'd be happy to do that. I think you guys are working on a shield right now or something.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Templar Shield, you said?
Yeah, it's kind of, I think he has it open
Yeah,
right
what's the
here, and actually it's also, yeah, so. you wanna
what's
go?
the project?
But start.
Oh, cool. So what are you supposed to do?
We're supposed to craft a story into the shield, make it feel real as possible, because the chunkiness of the molly also feels just like a jealous look. Basically add details to make it tell a story.
Awesome. Well, actually, here, let me show some stuff.
It's on the desktop right here, if you want to dive in.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's take a look at some shields.
So that's a FPX 13. So basically for the assignment, we just did our Zbrush importer. And then, yeah, we're just crafting, as he said, crafting storyline into the existing shield.
Sweet. Shields are fun. Hard surface stuff is a lot of fun, I think. So we allowed, I guess.
Yeah, you can subdivide the heck out of it and get crazy.
Cool. So I recommend to, if you want to, like, the first thing that obviously comes to mind probably is like some scars or something like this. I have subdivided this 5 up to the 5th subdivision level, which is roughly 3 million polygons. That just means that I can kind of work on this a little bit more freely to have quite a bit more resolution there. So brushes, Damien Standard, where are you? Damn Standard. It's not called the Damn Standard brush, that's an abbreviation. It is the Damien Standard brush. That is the guy's name who created the brush. This is a nice little cool carving brush, as you can see. A lot of the sculpting processes that come here really are dependent on how you kind of work with your pen pressure. So a really nice fundamental to kind of think about while you're in here sculpting is something called, well, in here, in 2D, it's often called edge quality or stroke quality. It's the same thing here in 3D. So if you're, excuse me. So if you're drawing something in 2D, you don't want to just draw a line from point to like A to B, and it's the exact same line weight or thickness all the way through. You actually want to think about adding some variation to that. So if you're going to have a scar or some kind of cut or something like this on metal, you might start a little bit lighter, and then you get a little bit harder towards the middle, and then you fade out a little bit more too. So you start creating a quick little scar like that. And think about places where you would want those scars and scratches to be. So you might want a little bit more around the rough and tumble areas, the edges, where you could start kind of scarring that up. I'm just using the Damien Standard brush there a little bit. And obviously you don't want everything to be exactly the same, so you wouldn't want to just do something like this, where you just have this repeating pattern, unless you were crafting, like Nick said, craft a story, unless you were having something like, maybe this is a shield that people use to defend, I don't know, animal attacks, maybe this is a bear claw scratch mark going through there. Other than that, repeating patterns tend to look very, very obviously fake, so a lot of the time it's nice to avoid that kind of stuff. With this scar, I typically don't like to just grab one brush, draw something out, and then you're done with it. I like to add a bit more non-uniformity to it. The same thing applies if you were to, let's say, add a texture here with a texture stamp. You wouldn't just want to use that texture right out of the gate. You want to add a little bit more variation to it. So, you know, you can start kind of playing with that, maybe holding the Alt key starts to add a little positive material, you know, although this is probably metallic, maybe wooden. You know, this would probably be something you'd want to decide before you start sculpting or modeling on this. But another fun brush to kind of just play with here with this kind of stuff is a nice little clay brush. I recommend personally the clay tubes brush. There are quite a few different clay brushes in Zbrush. The clay tubes is a little bit easier to work with than something called the clay buildup brush. The difference between those two are here is the clay tubes and here is the clay buildup. The thing with the clay buildup brush is that it will build up infinitely, and all of a sudden you rotate the camera, and you got like this gnarly mess. So it's a little bit harder to control. You can use either one. I recommend playing around with both. You just kind of get in there and see what you can do. So, you know, if I was going to be doing some scratches, you know, if this is metallic, I would maybe come along the edge of this here, making it look a bit more, you know, dinged up like metal. This one feels a bit unbelievable for metal. So just kind of thinking about the material. I think grabbing some reference would be really important here. But just kind of going off the cuff, I've done this quite a few times. So do as I say, not as I do. And then the other brush that I would recommend would be that brush that I mentioned earlier called the Trim Dynamic. So the Trim Dynamic brush, you could make a really big brush and, you know, start to add like some metal, you know, dings, dents, whatever here. Or you could, like I was doing with the clay brush there, start to, you know, make that feel a little bit more metallic, etc. Playing with that. So that's starting to look pretty cool there. Maybe not as good here towards the end. So you could probably work with that a little bit more. But that would be my basic kind of workflow for starting to add some dings and scratches. So, any questions about those brushes or anything there? Cool. And then, like I said, if you wanted to do any kind of like texture stamps, so let's say you find something online, what I recommend is grabbing a standard brush, which you just BS, just like this software. Grab, oh, we don't want any of those. Grab that standard brush, click on this little stroke slider here, click on drag rectangle, click on alpha, grab yourself an alpha or import one. You can click and drag out different textures on your object, nice and quick. Obviously, that's probably not something we would want to use. We might want to find something a little bit different and kind of play around with some different ideas. I mentioned that kind of, you know, slash mark earlier, so you know, you can maybe use that to start working on some kind of slash mark or something. Play with that a bit more. But yeah, scratches, scars, any of this kind of stuff is, I think, a lot of fun to work on. Any kind of like organic material is really fun and easy because, I say easy, but a lot easier because you can be messy, you can be inorganic with, or you can be organic with it and essentially not really mess up too much because the sky is the limit. And it's going to be pretty hard to create something too unbelievable when you're talking about scratches and scars and all that good stuff. Absolutely. But yeah, that middle one's probably the better one, better example. But Damien standard brush, clay, and trim. Clay tubes and trim dynamic. Cool. Well, I think it's about time here.
Yep.
So any other last second things? Yeah.
Awesome. Well, absolutely. Thanks for coming and try to follow this guy online if you're looking for more free information or cool videos or streaming or anything like that.
Yeah, I have a ton of free tutorials on my YouTube channel. Another great guy. I I'm a very in-tight member of the Zbrush community. Like I said, I'm one of their official Pixelogic streamers. Michael Pavlovich is a great guy if you're looking for tutorials online, if you know him. Shane Olson, Ashley Adams, if any of those names ring a bell. I would look up Michael Pavlovich if you're looking for some great tutorials, or check out my YouTube channel, Follygon. Okay, cool, thanks guys.
Awesome, thank you.